Welcome to Working with a Doula, What You Should Know, hosted by March of Dimes and CVS Health Foundation. Big thanks to March of Dimes and the CVS Health Foundation for hosting this event. They've just announced an exciting new collaboration focused on increasing the number of doulas in the workforce across the US and increasing the number of women and pregnant people accessing their services. So we're really excited about that. My name is Brittney Palmer. I'm a public health professional and a birth doula, and I'm also a manager with March of Dimes Mom and Baby Action Network. I'm passionate about education, community, and health equity. I am joined by Ayana Lage, a lifestyle blogger and freelance writer. She writes about motherhood, mental health, social justice, and everyday life. And also Daniella Flemings, HR business partner in the tech industry and a former client of mine. So, yeah, I was actually her doula. Just so everyone in the audience is clear, just in case you don't know what a doula is a non medical trained professional who assists pregnant people, moms and their families during the pregnancy, during labor, during delivery. So that support can include educational support, it can include advocacy, and it can also include physical support, which is what I think a lot of people think of when they can think about a doula. They think about someone in the room helping you to breathe, giving you the massages and things like that, but it is so much more. Another thing to know about doulas is that they are different than midwives. A lot of people kind of use the two interchangeably, but they're very different. A midwife is different than a doula in that they're actually a medically trained professional. They can deliver babies, they can take both vitals, they can do certain procedures. Those are all with outside of the scope of what doulas do, right? So doulas aren't going to necessarily do things that are medically based. They're not going to do any procedures. What they are going to do is offer that those educational opportunities. They're going to offer advocacy during pregnancy, during delivery, when appropriate. And they are going to offer again, that mental, emotional support. And that's actually a perfect setup for what we are talking about today, which is what you should know about working with a doula. Both of these women definitely know something about that. They've both had unique experiences with doulas, and we're going to talk about that today. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with Ayana. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Yeah. So when I got pregnant, I found out the end of 2019, and I always knew that I would want to invest in doula care, especially as a Black woman. And, the statistics surrounding maternal mortality for anyone who isn't aware, Black women are significantly more likely to die in childbirth compared to our white counterparts. So I hired a doula. I did some, perinatal care with her, and it was great. And then the pandemic hit, which was obviously unexpected. So my daughter was born in August of 2020, and when she was born, only my husband and I were allowed in the hospital room. So I actually wasn't able to have the doula with me, and I had a bit of a traumatic birth experience, which I think could have been avoided had I given birth during a different time. But postpartum, I actually worked with a doula agency. So I used my doula and others because I had a difficult time postpartum, and it was just completely a game changer. So I recommend it to everyone who I talk to and anyone who asks.
Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'm so sorry that you had a traumatic birth experience. Daniela, what about you? Can you tell us a little bit about what led you to work with a doula and a little bit about your experience?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I do know Brittany, and she's very heavily involved in doula work. And so, between speaking with her and just understanding the racial disparities that were going on, I was afraid, honestly. I got pregnant May 2021. And so, once I found out, I was just kind of like, okay, what do I do now? Hearing stories about Beyonce and Serena Williams, honestly almost dying because they weren't flagging things like preeclampsia really made me just consider a doula because I'm like, well, these people have unlimited amounts of means and resources and money. So if they almost experience this, then what does it mean for me? And so for me, I definitely wanted to make sure I got a doula. I wanted to be informed. I wanted to be knowledgeable. I wanted to know best practices. I wanted to know research. I love my research, but research can be overwhelming. And when you're pregnant, you're already trying to research a million things to put on the registry. The last thing I wanted to think about is what I needed to do to keep myself and my baby healthy and alive.
There are lots of different types of doulas as well. So, Ayana mentioned before postpartum doulas, perinatal doulas, or full spectrum doulas who work with folks during their pregnancy. They're there for the delivery, and they may also include some postpartum services. Or there are birth doulas like myself who are just working through pregnancy and delivery. When it comes to the cost of a doula, it can range anywhere from $0 to $1,200, $1,500, so on and so forth. It really depends on the doula. And how they kind of rate their services. When it comes to how to pay for a doula, there are a few different avenues that you can actually go. So, first of all, ask your doula, do they accept payment plans? Do they accept insurance? Do they accept Medicaid? If so, what information do they need from you in order to start that process? Also, keep in mind that all doulas don't accept insurance, all doulas don't accept Medicaid, but some of them do. And so it's important. And when you're interviewing, when you're asking them kind of about their services and about payment options, that you put all of that out there. Another really great way to pay for your doula services is to include it in your registry. Ask people to contribute in that way. Once they understand that you are, asking for this service, you're hiring a doula, they are more than likely going to want to contribute. So that's another way that you can pay for those services. So, question for both of you. When you chose to work with a doula, what were you looking for?
Because I already knew Brittany, I didn't really have to look long, far, and hard. But what was important to me is that I felt comfortable, and that also my significant other felt comfortable. Like I said, the process of pregnancy could be stressful, and I just wanted to be able to ask questions without feeling dumb, without someone judging me, without somebody being like, "Girl, why are you asking me this type of stuff?" And so that was really top of mind, and someone that was research based. I didn't want people to just be pulling numbers and statistics and stuff just from thin air. I didn't need people to tell me what their grandma used to experience. I really wanted reputable sources, valid information, and up to date information. So those are the most important things to me. And again, like I said, just hearing that doulas kind of help you to get to that finish line, that was enough for me.
Ayana, what about you?
Yeah, I I feel like it's a little bit ironic because the most important thing for me was hospital care and having someone else physically there. I remember in my mind, again, I got pregnant right before the start of the pandemic. I wanted to have my husband, my mom, and a doula. And I'm like, I will be covered by people who can advocate for me, who know what they're doing. And unfortunately, it didn't work out that way for me. But I also really, as Daniela said, wanted to have evidence based information. I feel like pregnancy is a time where you're so vulnerable and you're Googling trying to figure out what's what. And it can be very overwhelming, and it's hard to know, like, okay, I remember I'd reach out to my doula and say things like, okay, caffeine, like, can you just tell me how much coffee I can drink today and like not worry about hurting the baby, So things like that was really helpful to have someone who I could reach out to, who I'm like, I trust her opinion and her knowledge.
It was so important to me that my doula was Black, just as important to me that my OB-GYN was Black, just again, because we're thinking about these racial disparities. I just wanted people that looked like me, that had family members that looked like me, and that felt very invested in my experience because, again, I I wanted to have a positive birth experience. I wanted to live. I wanted me and my baby to survive.
Ayana, you sort of touched on some of this, but can you talk a little bit about some of the resources that your doula provided during pregnancy, during childbirth, even some of the resources your postpartum doula provided?
So I think that the biggest thing for me was having someone that I could reach out to. I remember having a time where I was spotting blood during pregnancy, which can be normal, but I'd had a previous miscarriage. So I was very, very anxious. And I think like, you mentioned like your OB/GYN, like I liked my doctor, but hearing back and all of that was such a process because it's like, okay, you got to call a nurse, they'll or a nurse midwife, and you wait for them to call you back. And like, so I think for me, having access to like a trusted opinion right away, not having to like go on Google or Reddit and try to see what people said about it there. But other than that, we met and talked about my birth plan and what I envisioned for birth. Um, I will say that for me, I think the most valuable experience, I mean, it's the most valuable part of having a doula was postpartum. I actually developed postpartum psychosis after giving birth, which was an incredibly traumatic experience. But one, my doula was part of my care team, so not able to provide medical care, but she was actually alerted my husband, um, "Hey, I think you need to contact Anna's psychiatrist. Like, I think something's wrong." So she was kind of sounded the alarm just because she had the experience of knowing what postpartum is supposed to look like. But then also something that I didn't realize that you could do was, and I don't know if this is true for everyone, but we were also able to pay an hourly rate for her to spend time with my daughter, which was just like so helpful as I was recovering and there was so much going on. So, as a new mom, handing your baby off to someone is like a very, at least for me, it was like a very like anxiety driving thing. Like I did not want to do it in general, like even with family, but having someone there, I'm like, I trust you. I know that like you can be here for a couple hours and be with my baby. I can do something to make me feel normal again.
Daniela, do you have any other points that you'd like to share around resources that your doula provided during pregnancy?
Yeah, as you already stated, Ayana, just having that birth plan was really helpful, walking me through what labor versus active labor looked like, a mucus plug. These are things that you don't hear about. You'd see on TV someone's water would break and then they would just go to the hospital and have their baby. My water didn't even break until I was there and they broke it for me. And so just even knowing those telltale signs was very valuable. I already kind of said this, but it was so important for my significant other to also have this data, this knowledge, so that he would know what to do, so that he knew what to look for, so that he could support me while I was in labor, in that hospital room, just knowing what to call out. Just pacing. I also was afforded the luxury of having someone to help me like stretch and walk up the stairs with me, trying to get that baby down. Like that was really helpful. It's tips that I share with my friends now, like when they're like, oh, someone was literally just going through labor. And I'm like, make sure you keep moving, use that medicine ball. Even if you have an epidural, use that peanut ball. Like just again, I think that there is this assumption that you're just laying there and you're just kind of waiting for baby to come. And my doula was able to say, like, no, you can actually move around. And the other thing, I think people here is like 0 to 100. And when I say that, I mean like the pain to epidural pipeline. Whereas my doula being in the room, she's like, okay, like how about these other narcotics, or what about this other drug that won't necessarily make her bedridden. I just think that these are things I would have never asked for, or even my mom. My mom wanted to be in that room with me, and I'm like, sorry, mom, they allow two people. It's going to be him and doula. Like that's what it is. And so again, I think that really just, I don't want to say changed the trajectory of my pregnancy, and maybe my delivery, but I think it did. I wanted to highlight that my doula experience was mostly virtual until she came in town the week of my birth, literally like a day or two before I had my daughter. And so when people are looking for these resources, when they're looking for a doula, if you find someone and they're in a different city or a different state, don't be afraid to ask if they offer virtual services, because you might find that they can make it work, especially if they don't have a bunch of clientele that's due around your same time. um, I just wanted to note that.
That's a great point, Daniela. Virtual services can work. They are not necessarily, they might not be the right option for everybody. But for me and my practice, my virtual practice is pretty comprehensive, and we do a lot of the same things that we would do in person. I'm providing a lot of the same information and education. So I definitely think that if you come across virtual services and that is A, what you can afford, or B, what you have access to go for it. It can be a really, really, really great option for the people who are looking for a service. That's a really great point, Daniela. Both of you kind of touched on this. Oftentimes, people are hesitant to hire a doula, to have a doula in the room because they plan to labor and deliver with their partner or another family support person. Can you talk a little bit about the role of your doula versus the role of your support person and maybe how they integrated and work together? Ayana, I think we'll start with you.
Yeah. So I mean, I can't speak to laboring with a doula, but I do think that my goal in hiring a doula was to have my husband there for like I don't want to say moral support, but basically to, rub my back, say, you're doing amazing, kind of give the affirmations that I needed. But then to have my doula there to just kind of, as Danielle was saying, help you out with like, okay, these are the stretches you should do. Like, this is kind of what comes next. So I also think that for my husband, I don't know that this is a unique experience. I mean, he wasn't like grossed out or squeamish about any of it, but I think he felt very overwhelmed. And it's funny because we ended up doing it with just us, and he just was like felt very out of his element. So I think that can be really helpful just to balance it out, and just so you don't have to depend on one person the entire time.
Something that I share with clients or prospective clients is that as a doula, I'm not there to replace your partner, your support person, your other family member. There are things that they can give you and do for you that I could never, right? Ayana, I'm not going to be able to give you the level of oxytocin that your husband can. Those are the things that I like to share with people. It's like, hey, we all have our role, we all have our responsibility. And for me as a doula, I love to disappear as much as I can. I really like to see partner or support person really getting in there, even if that means I have to grab them by the shirt and pull them in and remind them what we practice, remind them what they know, remind them of their value in the room and during this time and in this space. So anyone who is curious about, hey, what a doula kind of interfere with, my partner and my connection or my other support person, that's not what they're there to do at all. Doula is really there to fill in the gaps if and when there are any with your support person or partner, and to provide that kind of professional opinion and those educational resources, those advocacy resources, so that we're all working together as a team to bring this baby into the world, but also to keep everyone safe and healthy. And finally, to have a positive birth experience, because I think that oftentimes, that's what we're working towards. We're working together towards. And oftentimes we talk about how we want a healthy baby and a healthy parent, but we have to really, really think critically about that, because is that all? Can we not do better, right? Can we focus more on having a positive birth experience? And that doesn't mean just avoiding a C-section or not having this or not having that happen, but really thinking about, okay, my plan may not have gone exactly how I thought it would, but I'm equipped to make informed decisions. I'm equipped to feel in control of this experience and of this situation. So I think that's a point that I really want to bring up when it comes to having a doula. Do I need a doula if I have a really strong support system? And I think you absolutely do. Talk to me a little bit about how your doula and your OB work together.
I guess I can talk about this two different ways. So, my OB throughout my pregnancy was not the OB that delivered my baby, which we know is common. So, of course, the OB that I had, Dr. Lai, who delivered my baby, I met her during my pregnancy, during the visits. I kind of did a rotational around the office. But the way that my doula and my OB worked together was more so through me during the pregnancy. I would let my doula know, like, hey, this doctor's appointment visit is coming up. Or sometimes my doula would let me know, like, hey, actually, I think you're going to be doing your glucose test this week. This is what you should expect. And then she would say, hey, these are the types of questions that you could ask your OB. And that was extremely helpful, even as I realized that, hey, Dr. McDonald, who was, again, my Black OB-GYN, she may not deliver my baby. My doula was like, hey, well, it's okay to ask her, like, how have you seen the other doctors in your practice go to bat for Black women, people of color, et cetera. And even those questions were extremely helpful as it related to my doula working with the OB-GYN in the delivery room, or even just the nurses. It wasn't just the OB, but all of those medical practitioners and such. She was really my advocate. And so, again, just being like, okay, she actually doesn't want an epidural. This is the route she wants. When I was ready to push, my OB came in. She's like, all right, Daniella, we'll grab these arms and we're going to have you lay on your back. And Brittany's like, well, actually, or my doula, she's like, actually, she would prefer to push on all fours. And they're like, well, does she have strength? And she was able to advocate for me and say, well, she's actually been squatting this whole time. She's actually been doing this. Let's go about it this way. And so, again, just having that expert there to provide questions, to provide advocacy for me, it just meant the world. And I think it just provided a better experience.
Ayana, can you tell me a little bit about, you mentioned that you had some mental health issues and some specific episodes occur in the postpartum period. Can you tell me about how either your birth doula that you work with during pregnancy or your postpartum doula helped to support you at that time?
Yeah, so I actually worked with the same, as I mentioned, kind of team of doulas, but the biggest thing I think was helping sound the alarm that something seemed off. I mean, I'm gonna give like a 10-second overview for anyone not familiar with postpartum psychosis, but it's the rarest postpartum mental health condition and is characterized by hallucinations, delusions, and an emergency. It has to be treated right away. It can lead to it's the condition most closely associated with mothers harming their children. So it's just like a very scary situation to be in. So I had a period where I was starting to get very paranoid over who was around my baby and not trusting my husband, not trusting my parents, who I'm very close to. And it was around this time that my doula actually, she not only reached out to my husband and told him that he needed to call my psychiatrist. She tried to track down my psychiatrist's information herself because she immediately realized that something was wrong. So I think that just having that there, having someone physically there with us, I ended up being hospitalized for 2.5 weeks. So she obviously wasn't present for that. But then when I got out, she was a resource for me. Was really helpful. I definitely think that it was, I know that you mentioned the cost earlier, it was a financial privilege for sure to be able to spend the money to have someone be there. I mean, we were still using my doula service like 2 to 3 months after my daughter was born. So it was definitely a financial investment, but one that I am really glad that I made. And as you said, like, she didn't replace the role of my husband or my family. She couldn't replace the role of my psychiatrist or therapist, but it was just having another person there who was on my side, who wanted the best for me, and who's just very aware of my symptoms. And I actually plan to, if I have another child, meet with her and have that be like, obviously the biggest goal is avoiding postpartum psychosis recurrence, and put a plan in place, not only with my doctors, not only with my family, but also with her and her teams, just so that I'm like, okay, I'm covered. I have people on my side who like know what to look out for.
I think that's great. And I think that's a great point as far as when you are reaching out to doulas, moms and parents that are out there, when you're reaching out to doulas, please don't be afraid to share with them any of your mental health concerns, any of, things that if you know that you have a history of depression, you have a history of anxiety, that's something that your doula should know so that they can help to provide you additional resources so that they can sound those alarms, so that they can look out for red flags, because a good doula is going to be aware of them and be able to, like Ayana described, kind of say, hey, I think something's a little off here. And because it is someone that you trust and someone that you are in communication and contact with, they may be able to not only raise the flag, but also share that with your partner who may not be as aware of some of these signs and symptoms that doulas and other professionals in the perinatal and postpartum world may look out for. So, thank you so much for sharing that, Ayana.
Yeah, of course.
When it comes to finding a doula, there are lots of different avenues that you could go. You could go right on Google and look up doulas in your area, doula collectives. You could go on social media, like Instagram, using different hashtags for your city. You could ask around, ask other moms and parents and families who have had children. Have you worked with a doula? Did you ever hear of one? Do you know of someone that has worked with the doula? Facebook groups are also a really good resource when we talk about social media, but there are also lots of directories online. So, for instance, you can go to certain certifying organizations like DONA, they have a directory. You can go to the Black Doula Association directory if you are looking for someone that is a Black doula. So I really encourage you to reach out far and wide to find a doula. You don't necessarily have to pick the first one that you got that pops up on your Google. Ask your provider. Ask all of the providers that you see during your time, because sometimes during your pregnancy, because sometimes providers, OBGYNs, midwives, they have partnerships with doulas and that they can refer to. They're aware of different programs and other resources within the community that they can refer you to. So those are all really great resources and ways to find a doula if you don't happen to kind of just have one in your personal Rolodex. To that point, as we're talking about finding a doula, how to find a doula, what are some questions that a pregnant person should ask as they're kind of interviewing a doula and deciding whether or not they're a good fit for them and their family?
As you both know, there's a lot of judgment, or there can be a lot of judgment in the birthing community. And I really wanted to make sure that I found a doula who was okay with my choices, who was okay with the fact that I wanted a medicated birth, and who would listen to my preferences.
That is such a good point, Ayana, because during my labor, I at one point looked at my doula and I was like, Brittney, I'm sorry, but I need that epidural. Like I tried, I was in labor by hour 8 at that point, and I just could not do it anymore. And finally, she's like, Daniella, it's okay. This is your experience. I'm here to support you, and these are the things you can do after that.
Like, I remember watching the anesthesiologist come in and being like, "I could marry you." I
Literally,
was
I want to be an epidural for real.
bless you.
Yes, but even with that, to both of y'all's point, that's something else that when you talk to your doula, when you're interviewing and trying to find out if they're a good fit, what are their views on epidurals? Do
Right.
they have tricks in their bag? Because what I said to Daniela when she was saying, "Hey, I really have to have this epidural," that's fine. Are you willing to continue to work and to in order to make progress? If you are, let's do it. I have tools that we can use. I have, methods that we can use during this time. So again, Well, to both of your points, I think that's a great question to ask the doula that you're looking to work with. Hey, this is something that I'm thinking. How does that land with you? Because then
Yeah.
they can provide you information like, oh, go for that epidural. If you're going to have an epidural, let me tell you about some of the better ways to do that. Let me tell you about how if you wait until active labor, you'll have better outcomes. Let me tell you about
Yeah.
how you can still use a peanut ball, you can still squat, you can use the bar, you can X, Y, and Z. So it's important that you're working with someone that you can have that open and honest communication with.
But then I also think that I would definitely want to know um, what like whether they'd be available postpartum. I didn't even know that postpartum doula was a thing literally until I gave birth and reached out to my doula and said, "Hey, I think I still need help."
I'd also like to understand, how many births they were present for, if they've ever experienced a C-section birth, or just there's a variety of things that could happen in the labor and delivery room, and I would love to understand what they've seen. I'd love to ask them, how have you advocated for a mother? When it's her versus doctors or even her versus partners sometimes, because ultimately that was something I had to think about. Like, what if push came to shove and it was me or baby's life on the line, and just having that birth plan present and letting my doula know, like, this is what I want. That was very important to me, as well. Have you worked with Black women, or people of color too? But again, I'm talking about racial disparities here, so I'm being very specific. Uh, I was in good hands, luckily.
What are some things that you wish other moms, pregnant people, folks going into labor and delivery, having babies knew about working with a doula?
And this is such a good question because I haven't shared my part of my experience. I'll talk fast, but I think it's really important. I had the option to pay my doula to be there virtually. And I kind of was like, I don't want someone virtually. I want someone there. We'll be fine. I did not realize how hard it is to challenge a doctor when you think that they might be wrong. I ended up with an emergency C-section because of issues with my daughter, who thankfully was fine. But the reason that the C-section happened is because my mom, who I'd been keeping posted, called my husband and said, "You need to find the doctor right now. You need to ask what the plan is to get the baby out. They're telling you the heart rate's dropping, but they're not telling you what's happening. Like, you need to get this done." And you would think that I mean, maybe some people are in that situation and they are like, "I'm going to go chase them down and like tell them that they need to act." But for us, you're just not used to challenging people in positions of authority. So as Danielle said, if it's like, us versus the doctor and we need someone to, like, I just never thought that it could make such a change. So I think that's something that I would tell people is, even if you have the knowledge, even if you're equipped, even if you have the supportive partner, when push comes to shove, you may still struggle to stand up for yourself.
I think I wish people knew that you're not trying to boss them around, that doulas aren't trying to boss you around, that they are truly your advocate, that they want to help you, that they want to be there for you, and that they're providing, like you said, I keep saying this, but evidence-based research, that they're not pulling this out of thin air. And just because you've worked in this setting before, or you've known somebody who had a baby, or your mom had a baby, that doesn't necessarily mean you don't need a doula. I don't know how else to say that. I just want people. I am rooting for doulas always and forever.
Thanks,
Yes.
Daniela. Thanks, Ayana. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you to both of you for joining me. And I think we've all learned a little bit more about what it means to work with a doula. And thank you to March of Dimes and the CVS Health Foundation for hosting this discussion and making it happen. We're grateful for their commitment to helping not only increase the awareness of doula services, but also helping to increase access to doula services. They're also addressing doula retention and improving conditions under which doulas practice so that they can balance their work with taking care of themselves and their families. March of Dimes is there for women at every stage of motherhood, as well as for families and every day. And this collaboration with CVS Health Foundation to increase access to doulas is just one more way that March of Dimes fights for the health of all moms, babies, and families. We are so grateful you joined us today, and thank you both so much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. This was great.